He was just really a cool kid. He was different from day one. He had the biggest heart of anyone you would ever know. He was always a giver, and he was wise beyond his years. He loved talking to older people and always wanted to be the helpful one, always wanted to be the one to accomplish something. Later on, after my son passed, I did a book, and I was trying to think of the coolest name for the book I could think of, because there's so many people that have lost loved ones and they've named their books. And I really wanted to think of something, but something that made me laugh and that just totally made me fall in love with my son over and over again. The things that he used to say, he was so funny. But I remember, I have 7 sisters and 3 brothers. I'm from a large family, and we all get together every year. Some of my sisters decided to go shopping, and I was going with them. And Troy, and I have another son that's 3.5 years older than Troy, they were going to stay with my sister along with all of their cousins. Troy was about 4.5 years old. And I guess it had gotten a little bit too much for my sister. There were like 9 children there, and she told everyone to get on the couch. Everybody had to calm down. Well, Troy was always very independent, and he listened to everything anyone said. We were a church-going, God-fearing family, and my sister Connie says, everyone get on the couch right now. We're going to calm down. Everyone's being too rowdy. Your parents will be back soon. Well, everyone gets on the couch but Troy. And she looks at Troy and she says, Troy, that means you too. And she said, just as serious as he could be, he turned around with his little hands on his hips and he said, you're not the boss of me. And she said, excuse me? He said, God is. And that's the name of the book. You're not the boss of me. God is. Well, she tried to hold her laughter, and she said, I'm the boss of you right now. And he said, no, ma'am. My mom said God is the boss. Anyway, needless to say, Troy was made to sit on that couch, but that's the name of the book. He just would say the funniest things, and he knew that God was his ultimate father, but he was a good kid. He was that kid. He always cared about people, and he wanted to help someone else first. He would go into a lunchroom. I remember bringing him lunch money one time and looking for him around all of his friends, and I'd say, where's Troy? And they'd point over there. He would go into the cafeteria. If he saw someone sitting by themselves, he would go over there and sit with them. He was that kid. He didn't want anyone's feelings hurt. He had a big heart. It would really upset him to see somebody sitting by themselves. He never let anyone tease someone. He was a fixer. He was a helper and a fixer. What happened with Troy was, and I'm sure it's happened with so many other people, but Troy's story is a little bit different. He was a thriving senior, upcoming senior, played number 1 on the tennis team, played football, basketball. He played everything. He loved sports, but he really loved tennis. And that night, he had a tennis match the next day. He was playing number 1. And he also had SATs that next morning. It was a Sunday night. And he said, Mom, the guys and I are going to go hit some tennis at the tennis courts. I said, okay, fine, be home by 8 o'clock. He was a good kid. I mean, he made all A's and B's. Once in a blue moon, he'd make a C. But he's just a good kid. Wanted to go to Florida State, wanted to be a Gator. He loved the Florida Gators. He went to the tennis courts, and the night before he had escorted a little girl that had just won Miss HHS that night. He escorted her as she won Miss HHS the night before on that Saturday night. Well, Sunday night, I said, look, you have SATs, make sure you're in by 8 o'clock. Well, 8 o'clock comes, and I get this call from Troy. He says, Mom, the girls are coming down here to hit tennis with us. Please, let me just stay a little bit later. I said, you have SATs. He said, Mom, I don't ever have any trouble doing that stuff. Come on, come on. I said, all right, you be in the house by 9 o'clock. I said, I'm putting my pajamas on. I'm going to bed. You be in here by 9 o'clock. Okay. 8:30. I'd already put my pajamas on. I'm in the bed. The phone rings, but it's his buddy that's with him, and he's screaming at me, telling me, get to the hospital, get to the hospital. I'm, I didn't know. I jumped up out of bed, and he said, Troy's been run over. Of course, that was the beginning to Troy's end. It was the most scariest call I've gotten, but I jumped up. His dad and I were divorced, but we were on good terms, and he loved his dad, and we lived in the same neighborhood. As I'm leaving my house with my pajamas on, just throwing a house robe on because I'm flying to the hospital, called his dad, woke him up, and we meet at the hospital at the same time. I run into the emergency room. Can I help you, ma'am? Can I help you? I'm looking for my son, Troy. There was no Troy there. And I was in a panic mode. And then something clicked. Were they punking me? So I'm trying to call Troy's phone, no answer. I keep calling. I'm at the hospital. There's no Troy. Finally, someone answers the phone, and it's the boy that had called me, Derek. And he said, before he could say anything, he said, they're putting him in a helicopter. About that time, the police get on the phone and said, are you Troy's mom? Meet us at this field. He's being med flighted. I lost it. Because, that just doesn't happen to me. Everything was great. And we'd never had anything wrong. Everything was a perfect beaver cleaver family. And except for my husband and I getting a divorce. But we still were on great terms. I made it to the field as they were putting Troy on that helicopter. And I stepped into the helicopter, and he had been skinned like an Indian up under a car from the top of his head on the backside all the way down past his hip. His skin was gone. Hair was gone. He had been skinned. Still didn't know what was going on. And in the side of his hip, a tailpipe had gone into, and it had a big hole right there, and they were trying to clean it out. And he was shaking. They had him strapped down, and they were med-flighting him. And I could see in his pocket his phone still ringing. Everybody's calling Troy because I guess it had gotten out, the news. And then they told me I had to get off the helicopter because they had to leave, and they wouldn't let me ride. I jump in my car. I barely remember that drive to MCV, the hospital, but I do remember this. I remember going across that bridge and seeing MCV in front of me, and I hadn't lost it yet. I hadn't lost it. I'm just in a panic mode. The adrenaline's going. I see this helicopter landing on top of the hospital, and I lose it because I know my son's in that helicopter. And I don't remember parking the car. And it's so hard to park a car at MCV. I don't remember any of that. I would just remember finally getting in there, running into the emergency room, and they had my son strapped down, and he's screaming. His dad had already made it, and my other son had made it, and then he had a stepbrother from his dad, that was the oldest. They were all there, and the doctors were making them hold Troy down while they were vacuuming out this hole. And Troy's eyes contact me, and he starts screaming, Mom, help me. And he's screaming it. Of course, I lose it. And the doctors look up, and they say, get her out of here. I guess it upset Troy, and they made me leave, and I thought, can't believe this. So I'm sitting in the waiting room, and all of a sudden, 10, 20, 30, over 200 kids from his school show up in this emergency room. And then I still didn't know what happened. And then the mom and dad of the little girl that had won Miss HHS came in there with her. And they're sitting down. The lady comes, what's going on? We can't have this many people in here. And they make half of them leave. And now there's maybe 50 people in there. Everybody was really upset, and they still hadn't heard anything. And the little girl starts talking, telling me how sorry she is. She was one of the little girls that went up there. And they were leaving, and the girls, there were like 5 girls. She was driving, and I think Troy might have had a little crush on her. She was driving. Troy and his best friend jump on the front of the car when they were leaving because Troy had to be home by 9, and they were just leaving. And there were 3 guys that jumped on the back, and it's slow, and they have a little speed bump there. So she was speed up. They were just playing. Speed up and slow down, speed up. The 3 boys on the back jumped off. His best friend jumped off. Troy's still on the car in front of her. as she's driving, and he tries to get off, but he has a sweatsuit on, and he slides and goes up under the car, and it's one of these low-riding cars. She goes over the bump, and she's dragging him. She doesn't know it. She thinks he's off. And all the guys are screaming, "Stop the car, stop the car." And she stops when it's on the hump, and they look under the car, and Troy's chest, and he can't breathe, he can't talk, and they see he's turning blue, and they're trying to lift the car to get him out, and they can't. So she has to back the car up, and when she does, the tailpipe goes into his hip, and you hear a scream. At least he could breathe. You could hear a scream from Troy, and they were coming off. Anyway, they got on one side, lifted up, slid him out, and realized he had been skinned from the road where she was dragging him. Took a year of surgeries, from hair transplants to skin grafts to he broke his shoulder bone completely in two. They put a metal rod in. I didn't know, and I feel so really stupid because my background is mental health counseling. I was a guidance counselor in the schools, and then I went to mental health, where I worked with people that were on house arrest, people that were in addiction, but I was working it, but I didn't understand it. I was getting ready to understand it because my son was taking these pain pills per the doctor over a year, and then he cut them off. And Troy was getting back to normal. He didn't go to Florida State the first year because he graduated high school. Everything was getting back to normal. And he came to me one day. He was at his first year at Richard Bland College. He came to me and he said, "Mom, I need to talk to you." And just the look in his face, I knew something was wrong. And I said, "Okay, what?" And he said, "I'm addicted to pain pills and I need some help." I said, "What are you talking about? You haven't had pain pills in 6 months." He said, "No, I've been buying them off the street. The doctor cut me off, and I couldn't do without them, and I need help. I can't get off of them." For 12 years, my son battled this, in and out of rehabs. It was the hardest thing. At first, I thought, every time he'd come off, everything was fine. He would hide it for a few months and be back to it again. I didn't realize the hold and what drugs did to you. It was incredible to see it from my son being and I'm going to tell you, when I say the perfect kid, he was the perfect kid. He started losing his friends over the years, girlfriends. No one wanted to be around him. He was the most popular kid in school, just a cool kid that people wanted to be around. And the more he lost kids, the more he depended on that drug. And it was a vicious cycle. And he started getting in trouble with the law, as in driving his car, and it would wreck, or he would hit something because he would be on these pain pills, and they would search his car, and he was on probation for his own drug use. I have to say, through this entire 12 and a half, 13 year, Troy tried moving out, but he always had to come back because he was dependent upon these drugs. When he died, he was living at my house, but we never got in arguments. I never gave up. There's so many stories I hear from parents where they had to physically put their child out and just horrible things. But my son still was that kind. He still had that kind, big heart. I mean, I could have hundreds of dollars laying on my table, and he would never steal anything. He would never touch anything. If he needed something, he'd say, "Mom, I saw a 20 on the counter. I need it for gas." He'd call me, and I'd say, "Sure." He was still just the sweetest kid ever, and he wanted to get off drugs. It's not something he wanted to do. He tried. I can't count the amount of times he tried. Before I actually had my own son do this, I guess I'm very empathetic. But I couldn't understand. What do you mean you can't stop? Just don't go buy him. Just don't go do it. I could not comprehend what these people were going through. I was actually angry sometimes. "Daggone it, I've given you 5 chances. I'm going to violate you. You can't do this, and I would do everything from counseling to you name it. I would do it. I felt like I was losing my son, even though we remained close. We were best friends. and he stayed with me. He couldn't comprehend it either, but we both started studying addiction and the effects it had on your brain. We actually came up with, and because he tried everything, when you go to rehabs, they put you on this, they put you on that. I can tell you the best rehabs, I can tell you the worst rehabs, I can tell you what really works, I can tell you what doesn't work. We created a cream, transdermal, that would block the receptors. And now they have other things that they use from I can't even, that's it. They have other things with this cream. And I mean, I've studied the brain. And so what I was realizing, that once you become addicted, whether it's from a family of everybody in the family using drug use, the whole point, my son started writing a book and he called it This Could Happen to Anyone. That was the name of the book. Whether you were rich, whether you were poor, and he saw it too. He knew what was going on. It changes your brain chemistry. What we found out is your brain shuts down and the drugs take over. Your brain chemistry is changed. Your brain does not start working and producing all the serotonin and the dopamine and the vital nutrients that you need in order for your brain to perform and say, no, we don't want to do that. Your drugs are still talking. It stops and does not produce this until you have been clean for 1 year. If you have been addicted or have the disease of addiction and have been on all the pain pills, and which leads to something else, which leads to something else, your brain shuts down. Your brain's no longer working. It's the drugs. Your child's still in there, but it's the drugs talking. That what the doctors did, I wish they had told me the effect it would have. Why would you keep giving somebody something when you know that their brain, they should have known that. I'm not a doctor and I don't pretend to be a doctor, but after so many years of research, I realized what it did. And at that time, I was happy that the doctor said, okay, no more, because you take too much of anything, it's bad for you. But then I realized you can't just cut somebody off. They have to be weaned off. So every time my son would try to come off of pain pills or Xanax, he would have a seizure. So now we're going to a neuro doctor that tells me, you can't just stop your son from taking Xanax. And I said, oh, yes, I can. This is in the beginning. He said, no, ma'am, you will kill him. A seizure, too many seizures will kill him. He is frying his brain. He has to slowly be taken off. So I went to another doctor, really good doctor, and I like this doctor. He's pretty good. He's in Richmond. It's the Coleman Institute. And he told me the same thing. He said, no, ma'am, that doctor is correct. He said, I want to tell you something. He said, I had an accident and they put me on Suboxone. He said, I have all these colleagues that are Suboxone telling me Suboxone will help me get off the pain pills because I was in an accident. He said, what they didn't tell me was Suboxone's harder to come off of than almost any other drug. He said, Suboxone and methadone should be used as a takedown. What they did was build me up on Suboxone and kept me on there. He said, I like to never got off of Suboxone. He said, I know exactly what your son's going through. I think it's okay to go to the methadone clinic for 30 days or less. I really think it should be 2.5 weeks. Suboxone clinic, no more than 12 days. Because my son tried the methadone, tried the Suboxone. Actually, my son was on the methadone clinic. And when I went with him, and I know everybody was thinking, he's grown. No, he's not. He's my baby. He's my baby boy. And until he gets completely better, I'm not letting go. When I talked to the doctor and the nurses there, that's exactly what they were going to do. They were going to take my son slowly down. 3 months, he's still there. I go to speak to the doctor, and he says, I'm not talking to you. And I said, oh, yes, you are. I said, from what I understand, you have raised the amount of methadone in 3 months. That's crazy. He said, ma'am, you don't understand. I said, you're right, I'm not a doctor. But do you have a son has the disease of addiction? I said, so I'm more involved than you are. I said, you might know a lot more than me when it comes to being a doctor, but I can tell you you're doing this wrong. I've already spoken to several other doctors. This should be a takedown drug. what you're doing is building them up. They keep these people. Now, I gave that man an ultimatum. I said, unless you want me to expose you, you have 12 days to get my son off this methadone. And he did. My son wasn't happy, but 12 days my son was off. This methadone clinic is nothing but a Medicaid fraud, and I hate to say that, but it's the truth. I sat outside a methadone clinic for almost 3 weeks. People come up with their babies in their cars, and for years, they're on it for years, and it's so much money. Medicaid pays for the cab rides, Medicaid pays for the drug, they pay for so much stuff, and it's nothing but a racket, and these doctors make major bucks. It's supposed to be used as a takedown drug. It is now used as a maintenance drug, as well as Suboxone. Doctors can have up to 155 patients with Suboxone, and it's incredible. It's incredible. I know lots of nurses that work at these methadone clinics. After I get through with what I'm doing with my son right now, and we can talk about that with trying to pass the Troy bill and trying to get my son's foundation off the ground, I'm going after those clinics next because I'm making a difference. These kids are dying because of those clinics. I watched my son go from a brilliant, one of the most big-hearted, intelligent people that I've ever known, lose his self-worth. People treat people with this disease horrible. Even family members started treating him differently when they started going places. He lost his friends. I was his best friend. I know all about enabling, and of course in the beginning I did, but I learned quick to stop the enabling. I wanted my son to get better, and that was the only way to do it. I wasn't mean to my son, but I showed him love and that he was always wanted and always cared for. I can honestly tell you, without a doubt, my son died knowing that I loved him more than life itself. My son went through this for almost 13 years. We've always gone to church. We've always been religious. But my son and I had a plan. The last 2 years of his life, I said, son, one of the things I learned when I was young, my parents told me, if you ever are being troubled, if you help other people, it helps you get better. So I told Troy to start trying it. So Troy started, a lot of his friends were taking the drugs, and he started helping them and talking to them about the Lord and bringing them to Celebrate Recovery. And Troy really started getting really active. He got rebaptized, and he was changing his life around. And I saw a small spark in his eyes, and I knew he was on his way out. I knew he was working to climb out of that slimy pit he had been in for so long, and I could see it. He couldn't see it yet, but I could see it. I knew he was there.
Dear Lord, I know I am 31 days late. I wanted to do this to start the new year, but I am still not giving up. Please, 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 Lord, help me get over this addiction. Lately, I have been using just so I don't get sick. It is so hard to be a functional person of society when I feel sick. Plus, the craving to get something is just so overwhelming. Please, Lord, help me get over this. Give me the strength to do this. I want to move forward with my life. I want to be successful. I want to have a family. And most of all, I want to serve you. God, I really need this. Please, Lord, give me the strength. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
He was on probation, and probation is another vicious cycle that they like to keep you on, but I knew he eventually was on his way out. He still had some court things in 3 different districts. He was on probation. He was doing wonderful. But I also know with the disease of addiction, sometimes you fall back. He was doing wonderful. He'd been clean for I don't know, 4 or 5 months. He looked amazing. We had just come from the beach, and family, took family pictures. He was just doing so good. And one day I get a call. He had gone into town to see some buddies that had come from out of town, and they had given him a Xanax. He did not take that Xanax when he was with them. He left and went to a community mart, went inside to get a drink. It's a local town, everybody knows you. He came back out, and I guess that's when he took the pill he thought was a Xanax, but it wasn't. It was laced with fentanyl. The lady in the store saw Troy slumped over, called 911. The police came, and they called the ambulance. My son had to be Narcan back to life twice on the way to the hospital. So basically he dies, but he wakes up in the hospital. This is 3 months before he actually dies. He wakes up in the hospital to 2 police officers. By the time I'm there now, because they've called me, as I walk in, the 2 police officers are talking to my son, giving him an ultimatum. And his ultimatum is, I see you're on probation. You used today. You can either sit your time out in probation or you can work for us. And before my son could say anything, remember I used to work with mental health, and I used to work for the judges putting people on house arrest. I said, no, sir, absolutely not. No, ma'am. It's a lady and a man. And she said, ma'am, who are you? And I said, I'm his mom. And she said, well, he's old enough to make his own decision, and we will arrest you for interfering if you do not leave this room. And I said, well, my son's going to tell you that I can stay, right, Troy? And Troy looks up at me, he just died. So he's kind of out of it, and he says, she can stay. She knows everything about me. And they said, ma'am, then you can be quiet. So I'm sitting there, and they proceed to tell Troy that he only has to do something for them 4 times. They want him to buy drugs from a drug dealer 4 times. Of course, you know me. I said, excuse me, my son fought so hard to get out of that slimy pit. You're going to put him right back in it? And they said, ma'am, we told you to be quiet. And I said, no, I used to work for the judges. I know this cycle. Please don't do this to him. He fought so hard. Well, he didn't fight too hard. He fell back today. And I said, that's not fair. If you know anything about addiction, if you know anything about this disease, you do fall. You get back up and you keep getting it. You don't look back. And they said, ma'am, we're talking to your son. It's the last chance you're going to get, unless you're going to get arrested. So Troy's tears are running down his face as he's laying in the bed, but I'm sure it's to do with all the drugs and the Narcan. And plus, he was terrified. He told them, he said, I'm not strong enough to go buy drugs. Clearly, if I didn't show you today, I can't do it. If it's around me, I'm not strong enough yet. And they said 4 times. Or we'll take you to jail, son. We'll take you to jail. And I said, he's on probation. You're going to ask him to do something? Probation says he can't be around drugs. And they said, ma'am. And I just sat there and got quiet again. So he says, okay, I'll do it 4 times. Mom, I can't go back to jail. I can't go to jail. He was terrified to go to jail. So he agreed. And then they said, okay, we're going to wait for you to release. We're going to take you to jail. And I said, whoa. You just said that they said, no, he's going to go. We're going to charge him with this, but we'll get it dropped in court. So they charged him with, they said they found something in his car. He said, that you didn't find cocaine in my car. He said, I don't do cocaine. He said, I use downers. He said, I took a pill that was a Xanax and the nurse told him it was laced with fentanyl. They did blood work. There was nothing in his system but that Xanax and fentanyl in that pill. But they said they found it and they were going to charge him with it. That's how they were going to get him to do this. They took him to jail. I was there to pick him up. They let him right out. And I take him home. He's upset. The very next day, he has to go down to the police station, get fitted for a hat and a shirt. My son was a preppy little guy, so they bought him a little button down. They fitted him for that. He had to sign paperwork saying he wouldn't use drugs. And it clearly says on the contract, if you do, you can no longer be an informant. It says this on the contract that he signed. He comes back. He says, okay, 4 times. I can do this 4 times. About a week later, they call him, and they're set it up. I was a nervous wreck, and I probably did something I shouldn't have done. I knew the drug dealer that he was going to. I knew where this drug dealer lived. I've been living it now for 12, 13 years. I knew it. I went and hid in the parking lot of where he was going. I got to make sure my son's okay. I had to make sure he's okay. I sat and watched the whole. They gave him money at one location, which was about 4 miles away. He drives to the location to the drug dealer, gets the drugs, and he leaves. I watched my son leave, wait for him to leave. I didn't tell him I'd done this. I wanted to make sure my son was okay. They were putting my son back in harm's way, and I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't fix it. He comes home that night. I never told him that I did this. He did it 4 more times, and then they said, okay. He texts them and he says, look, I did it 4 times. Can I stop? Nope. Some of the film didn't turn out. We need you to do it again. These are texts going back and forth to the detectives. I didn't know at the time, but at probation, within 2 weeks of him doing this, he did this probably every other week. They had to do a buy. This went on for 3 months. I didn't know at the time, but he started failing drug tests. I found out after he passed away. No one did anything to help him. His probation, the detectives, no one. Finally, I guess it was about 2.5 months in, he comes to me and he says, Mom, I got to tell you something. He told me everything. He was an open book, and like I said, he considered me his best friend. He had lost everyone. He said, I've been failing drug tests. He said, I've failed 4. He said, I'm not using it all the time, but they're giving me the cash. He said, I carry the drugs back to him. He said, and I skim off the top, and I take a pill or two. And I said, oh, gosh, Troy. He said, I'm falling back into opiate dependency. I need help. And they won't let me stop. He said, I've told them over again and over again. I said, get in the car. Let's go. We went straight to the hospital, John Randolph, and they have a behavioral health. He told them what was going on. They transferred him to Chippenham. They kept my son for 11 days, detoxed him again. He gets out on the 11th day. Now, before he went in, on the way, he texts the detective and the probation and says, hey, I'm falling back into opiate dependency. I'm tired of this. I'm going to get help. I'm going into the hospital. You can check. Contact my mom and she'll tell you when I get in. And that was the text message that's on his phone. He gets out. I go pick him up. He gets out. The 12th day, they call him. The day after he gets out, and he has to do another buy. After he had just gotten help in a mental hospital, my son dies 3 days later. I had gone away for the weekend. I didn't know they were going to use him. It was a Friday. They used him for the last time. His dad wanted him to get a regular job, even though my son was a computer geek and he wanted a job in computers. He was just brilliant. He could do anything with a computer. He was disappointed his dad worked construction. He said, nope, you're working construction. I'm tired of this. You know, your mom's babying you. You're going to get a job. So he had to start Monday morning. He did the buy on Friday. I went away for the weekend. And on Sunday, I messaged him and I said, okay, just want to make sure everything's good. He said, I'm eating dinner with Dad. He said, I'll be home in a little bit. I got to get ready for this job. And I said, look, son, I know you're really down about this job. I know you are. But hear me. Just take the job to show your dad you can do it. I said, you're going to get your computer job. You've gotten your Microsoft certification. You're brilliant. Don't worry. I promise you, once this is all over with everything, you will be able to do it. He said, I know, Mom, I know. He said, but I'm just not a construction person. I know you're not. I know you're not, but it's okay. So that was Sunday morning. Sunday night, I texted him. And I said, hey, what time are you going to be home? He said, I just got in, ate dinner with Dad. He said, I'm pumped up about this job. I'm going to be okay. He said, I'm going to bed early. He said, Mom, I had asked, buy and sell estates. That's what I did. buy and sell estates on the side. And I had sold a bunch of furniture that week, and he had met somebody. He said, I have 480 from the furniture that I sold today. He said, can I take 80 and fill my car up and keep some cash in my account? He said, I'll keep the rest in my wallet. I said, yeah, sure, that's fine. So there should have been 400 in his wallet. Monday morning, he gets up. I messaged him and I said, hey, have a good day, good luck. Never heard anything back, which was weird. My son would always say, thanks, Mom, love you, something. The last thing I texted him Sunday night was, everything's going to be okay, son, I love you. And he had texted me back, I love you too, Mom. He was at my house. I never heard anything, so I thought he was just nervous. And then about 10 o'clock, I texted him again. I said, hey, how's it going? Anything today? You doing all right? Never heard. Then I thought, he's probably got his phone in the car, is what I'm thinking. I said, text me when you get at lunchtime. No text at lunchtime. I tried to call him, no answer. That mother's gut feeling, something's there. I knew something was wrong, and I texted him at 2, texted him at 4. Finally, his probation called my number, and she was really ugly, and she said, have you heard from Troy? He had an appointment today at 4:30, and I said, well, today he started a new job, and I think he was going to call you today. She said, you better get a hold of him and tell him to get here. I leave at 5 o'clock. If he's not here, I'm violating him. I said, okay, I've been trying to call him, but I will. I'll try to call him. So I messaged him again, called him again. And we went out. At one point, we were renting out some rooms on a property that we live on. And I text one of the guys, and I said, hey, have you seen Troy? He said, no. I saw him this morning. He was pumped up, left out the door to go to work. And I said, okay. He said, Donna, remember, he's working 10-hour days. He's off on Friday. So, it's okay, Mom. She was kind of, giving me a hard time. And I said, I just think it's weird. He hadn't texted me all day. He said, for goodness sakes, leave the boy alone. Anyway, an hour passes. Now it's like 6 o'clock. Still hadn't heard anything. I called the guy again. I said, can you check around the house? Because I remember he has seizures when he comes off of stuff. Everything was going through my head. I knew something was wrong. He said, yeah, sure, Donna. So he walks around, he calls it back. He said, no, I don't see any sign of him. And I said, have you gone to his room? Have you looked in his room? He said, yes, Donna, I've looked the entire house. He's not here. And I said, all right. And we're still talking on the phone. He said, I said, well, I had paperwork that he had paperwork he was going to take with him this morning. He said, that paperwork's still in his car. And I said, well, how do you know? He said, well, the car's right here. And I said, well, if the car's there, he's there. He said, well, I thought somebody might have picked him up. The car's been here all day. He said, actually, I didn't go to work today until 12 because it rained here this morning. He said, but Donna, I was getting in the shower. Troy was leaving out the door. He said, I just assumed he left. I said, I knew then my son was there somewhere. I said, I'm going to ask you one more time. Please go check his room. Anyway, he said, okay, but I've already checked it. And then he's outside talking to me. He said, wait a minute, his light's on up there. So he said, I'll call you back, Donna. He goes up there. And my son, there was a space in between his bed and the window. One bad habit I can honestly say my son had, he smoked. But he said he needed to smoke in order not to do drugs. I guess trade one addiction for another. Anyway, he said he walked into his room. No TV was on or anything, but his light was on. And as he walked over to the side of the bed, he didn't look in between the bed and the window. My son was in a praying position with his head down. He had died that morning. Rigor mortis had already set in. His phone was on the charger. So the only thing we can figure is he had gone out to the car because the paperwork was on the table. He put it in the car. He forgot his phone. He came up to get his phone. And I guess maybe he didn't have it charged, but the window was open a little bit where he had been smoking. And the coroner said that what he took was straight fentanyl. It was a pill that looked like, it was a fake pill, Percocet, but it was straight fentanyl. But it had the Percocet thing on it. And they found another one in his room, had 2 Percocets. And they said when he took that pill, he went straight down. He died instantly because it was no Percocet in there. It was straight fentanyl. So the dealer had sold him. He had told me, he said, Mom, I think the dealer knows that I'm an informant. He said, and he even texted the detective, telling him, I think they know I can't do this anymore. I'm scared for my life. So I'm sure the dealer sold him this fake Percocet. And he died instantly. He died instantly. Of course, this guy calls me back and he said, Donna, And when he said my name, Donna, I knew what was, I could tell the tone of the voice. And I start screaming. He said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My husband's in the car. We're at the beach. He grabs the phone. He says, Bill, start doing mouth to mouth, whatever. We're on our way. I didn't leave the car. I sat there. I was froze, screaming and crying. He's throwing everything from the hotel room in the car. Now it's about, I guess, 7:30. Yeah, about 7:30 at night. And he's throwing everything in the car. We left half the stuff in the hotel room. What takes 3.5 hours to get home from the beach took us probably a little over 2 hours. Of course, I'm calling his dad. His dad won't answer the phone. He's asleep, I guess. I don't know. But I call his brother, and his brother, they both go over there. But for some reason, I had the mindset to tell my son, Adam, get Troy's phone. Because I used to work in the system with the judges, and the first thing they do is they grab the phone and they erase it just to make sure nobody's, if he was texting the detectives, they needed to erase all this stuff. Adam gets there first. He goes up to the room. My son's still in this position. I can imagine how hard that was. He grabs the phone. I said, take the phone and throw it in your car. And I said, anybody else, tell them to call me. He said the very first thing when the police got there, they wanted to know what Troy's phone was. And he called me. He said, Mom, they're asking about the phone. I said, tell them to call me. Don't answer anyway. Just tell them to call me. They wouldn't call. They kept saying, do you know where's phone? Do you know where's phone? Then they got to my son's dead on the floor. And these police are swarming his room. Adam said there were 10, 12 police there. All they did was call 911, said somebody passed away. Anyway, they knew my son was an informant. They tried to get into his computer. Adam calls me. He said, Mom, they want to know what Troy's password is. Tell them to call me. They wouldn't call me. They kept pushing my son. What's his password? Do you know anything that could be his password? They were trying to get into his computer. They couldn't get in there. They found nothing in the room except for the one Percocet that was not Percocet, that was straight fentanyl, and that's how they found out how he died. But the doctor said he looked so good, he didn't think it was drug-related. He thought it might have been a massive heart attack at the time or a brain aneurysm. So I'm just thinking in my head, maybe that's what it is. I didn't look at my son's phone. By the time I got home, they had just taken my son. I didn't get to see him. I was a mess. I wasn't the same person anymore. But it was 7 months later, I get the death certificate back. And it says he died from straight fentanyl. There was nothing mixed. It was like he died all over again. And to top it off with, you're not going to believe what happened at my son's funeral 3 days after he died. At my son's funeral, I wasn't there when he died. I didn't make it before they took him away. They wouldn't let me see him because he was rigor mortis and he was in a ball, but he was in a praying position. I had to make this funeral the most precious thing ever. This was my baby boy, and I wanted everything to be perfect, every little detail. And so I got some of his friends that were going to talk, and my sister was going to talk. I knew I couldn't talk. My best guy that I went to school with in high school became a preacher. I'd called him, and he was going to speak. When I get to the funeral home, and I got there 2 hours early because I wanted to spend time. There were so many people there. I didn't really get to spend time with them. I did go up to them, but there were so many people coming up to me. So I thought, I gotta find time. When I walk outside just to take a breather, I see all these police cars out there. Now remember, I used to work for the courts. In my head, I'm saying, bravo, they're here to support my son finally. Thank gosh they're here to show respect for my son, is what I'm thinking in my head. And so I go back in, standing room only. People were wrapped around the building. Troy was so popular. He was just the coolest kid. He just had so many friends, but there were so many people, and it made me happy. They were standing room only. The police were there 2 hours before the funeral, but I'm still thinking it's to support my son because I used to work for the courts. The family sitting up front, and I direct view of my son in the casket. And I had to make this perfect. This is the last thing I could do for my son. And I'm sitting there. The preacher starts talking. He looks down at me, smiles. He knew Troy from the day he was born. And he starts talking. And he was talking about 10, 15 minutes, and all of a sudden the back door's open. Now they had monitors set up throughout the whole funeral home because the whole funeral home was packed with his friends and family. And police officers walk in tactical gear. 3 in tactical gear and then 2 undercover. And I kind of looked, I thought, that's weird. It's really, So I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden, you could hear people going, like a gasp. And I turned around, and Troy's best friend that was going to speak, they tap him on the shoulder and tell him to stand up, and they start handcuffing him. And the only thing I'm thinking is, they're not doing this during my son's funeral. Are they doing this during my funeral? Is this really happening here? And I'm looking up at my son, almost like my son's going to like, what the heck? But I'm just sitting there, and I look back, and nobody's looking at me, but this boy starts crying. Please let me stay. I need to speak. Let me stay. And then I thought, he's either killed somebody, drug trafficking, sex traps. There has to be something major. They would never interrupt my son's funeral for this, right? So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what did he do? What did he do? And they take him, and I think it's over with. I thought, how disrespectful, but I had to get my head straight. This is my son's funeral. It's something I'm going to remember forever and ever. I wanted it to be perfect. So the preacher finishes talking after 25 minutes. My sister gets up there and speaks. Then they call the family up, and everybody's I'm standing beside the casket. I'm exhausted. There were so many people that were walking up. It just seemed like it never stopped. So finally, I look up, want to see how many more people. I don't know if I could make it another second. I look up, and the doors open again, and lo and behold, they still had, I thought they'd taken the boy and gone with them. I hadn't thought about it anymore at that point. Now they have him shackled and handcuffed, and he is crying. He's hysterical, and only one boy with tactical gear, and it takes about 25 minutes for him to walk up. Everybody's in shock. I know they're in shock because Troy died, but now they're thinking, could they do anything else to this mom? They finally get up to me, and he's crying, please help me. He called me Mom. I was like the Kool-Aid house. My kids always had friends over, and he said, Mom, help me, Plum, help me. And I'm still thinking he had to have murdered somebody. There's no way they would do this in my son's funeral. It was just incredible. And finally, they get him up to me. He leans over to kiss Troy goodbye. He's in shackles. He leans over, almost knocks the casket over. Finally goes through, and I'm just, now at this point, I thought, I'm being punked. Something major. I just can't believe this. I'm crying. He's crying. And if there was any angel whatsoever that was representing Troy, he's probably thinking, this is like a movie. This is incredible. After, I guess the news went crazy. It was all over the TV media. It was on, do you know what the policeman said? They said, what is it, the reason y'all had to arrest him? What kind of crime did he commit? Child support. Why they wouldn't arrest him prior, when they were there 2 hours earlier, or wait until afterwards? Certainly, if he did something wrong, then justice be done. But don't take, there's no explanation. I can give you what I think explanations are, but you don't know what people are thinking or what they're doing. Maybe it was a sign to me not to say anything, but I had this huge lawsuit against not only the funeral home, but the city of Hopewell, and it's been going on now for 5 years, in and out of the local courts. I used to babysit for a lawyer back 100 years ago, when I was in high school. And I saw him in Williamsburg one day, and he said, Donna, I'm so sorry to hear about Troy. He said, but can I give you some advice? And I said, sure, please. Any kind of advice. He said, pull it out of the local courts. It's a good old boy system. Take it to federal court. And I said, I've spent over $100,000. I took out my retirement, everything to show what they did to my son. He said, you don't need any money? He said, go get a pro se book from federal court, Donna. He said, you're smart enough. Take the same lawsuit and put it in federal court. It's been there now for a year, and we're supposed to be hearing any day now. I sued every one of the officers, probation, because probation didn't do their job either. They didn't violate my son. After 3 times they finally did, guess what? Paperwork has disappeared. It was faxed over to the Hopewell courts and the Commonwealth attorney. They never found it. If they had just done their job, my son would still be here today, because he finally was beating that demon, and he wanted out, and he wanted this so bad. But they forced him to do this, and then after he started failing, it was their responsibility to say, I'm sorry, son, you're going to have to go to jail, or you're going to have to get help, or whatever they needed to do. But they used my son like a throwaway. My son was not a throwaway. He was my youngest son and the most precious boy in the world. It's incredible. He could be here if they had just done their job. And no one wants to take accountability. It's never been heard. I've done 5 different suits, and every time they throw it out. But now, at least this time with federal court, they've seen the evidence, black and white. It's not a mom mourning, which I am. It's a mom that has black and white proof. You didn't do your job. Your job description says this, and you did what you wanted to do. And that's my son's story. He should still be here.